Hello, and welcome back to another speed draw. This time I have Shoto Todoroki from Babysitting Duty, which is actually quite serendipitous, considering some of the, I think one art question will highlight exactly what happens in this video, so maybe we can, I guess, elucidate on that. But furthermore, I'd like to say I'm really, quite humbled in the fact that people are liking these Q&A videos and learning a bit more about some backstory insights into the universe that's been created on this channel. Again, feel free to ask questions on whatever. I am happy to explain. However, I will not, unfortunately, be dropping big hints anytime soon. Well, I'm going to try not to say anything. It's really difficult for me. But I would like to say thank you so much for the support on this channel. It really means a lot. I just enjoy creating, and I don't know, I like to have my imagination go wild sometimes, and it's been a long time since I've ever done anything like this, so I'm very grateful and appreciated that all of you are still sticking around, I guess. Anyhow, before I ramble on any further, let's continue on with some Q&A that I picked up from last week about anything that is in regards to the channel, in regards to my art, in regards to just anything. I am an open book. Tracy Comrade, I'm glad you got excited that your comment was on screen. You did pose like a very simple question and something that I think a lot of people have asked about a few times, so thank you very much. But I guess your question throughout this whole thing was you were wondering if you think the canon villains would be heroes in the villain AU. And thank you very much for the birthday wishes. So how I would see it is that, yes, I think this question has been posed a few times. I've not really answered it, only because I never really considered thinking about that side. But the surprise I found is that I guess in a way in the villain AU, the canon villains, which on this channel has been Shigaraki, Darby, and Overhaul, as in Kaichisaki, are considered heroes, quote unquote, heroes in the villain AU. I actually would attribute them, considering the timeline, that they are more like the Suicide Squad. Now, if anyone knows, I think DC. So if anyone knows who the Suicide Squad is, they are actually a bunch of convicted villains who actually work for the city and the state to fix up problems that they can't fix, because it's too dangerous for any of to bring any innocent people into the fray, so they use convicted villains to do the job. So I actually think that's what will happen with the villains in the villain AU. Should I actually write about that? Considering I've been very lax about writing the villains in the pro hero AU at this time. So if I ever get a chance to get onto that, I definitely will. It's something I really like to explore, the fact that they are a Suicide Squad in a way. It's like, I can only imagine the Public Hero Commission at their wits' end because of things going all wrong in the villain AU, that they hire former villains to combat the new ones. So I guess that's to answer your question. I would definitely do that. I would. Stitched Heart, you have been a very, I guess, consistent watcher of this series. I'm really grateful that I think some of the paintbrushes I've offered in a couple of Q&As before and everything have helped you. Again, I'm not a professional, I'm not an expert, I kind of just wing it with what I do. But if anything that I've ever experienced has helped you out, I'm very happy for. Again, thank you so much for the birthday wishes. But you actually have two questions Oh no, 3. I'm sorry, you have 3 questions. So I will go to the art question later since we're on the villain run right now. So the first question was, actually you have 4. You have 1 art question and 3 stories. My bad. Question number 1. The villain AU is of the main students or heroes you've been writing for thus far in the hero timeline, but they're just villains instead. They have their same travelers, same quirks, and meet differently like you say. Just want to know if I followed this correctly. Yes. Yes, you're correct. So the I guess the main hero students canonically have gone to the dark side. Let's say that. They have turned into villains. They also still have the same travelers. And again, if you just follow the Halloween logs, which you will see on screen here and which will be linked in the description below, if you listen to them, that's kind of, in a way, insight into how it came to be. In a way, it's more like this is insight of the world that they were in before they turned into villains. So, for example, like the greatest example, I did listen back to them actually quite recently. A good example is Shinso. If you listen to Hitoshi Shinso's, I guess, import in the Halloween Traveler logs, then listen to his villain story, The Specialist. Again, links to them both here and in the links in the description below. There is connection as to how he approaches the traveler, how he views everything, all of that stuff, all that good stuff. So there's a lot of connections there in case you want to get a slight insight into it, but that's the reason why that Halloween thing was a thing last year when I was making stuff. So Stitch Tart, you are on the right track. They do meet differently. This is like the villain AU as established is a completely different, of course, AU, alternate universe, that exists in a realm of this larger pool of stories. So there you go. Question number 2. Excuse me. Oh, there's 2 parts to this question. This is fun. Are the regular villains that currently have plots or stories in the current hero timeline? And part 2 of this is, are their travelers, the ones you mentioned, have had several lifetimes and are revived by this doctor in the Halloween videos? I am so excited! I remembered reading this and I got so excited. Reading it again, just like answering these questions makes me so much more excited. Okay, so part A, the regular villains that currently have plots or stories are in the current hero timeline. So the Pro Hero AU follows after the canon story of My Hero Academia. Not saying that it is canon, of course not, but it's them as pro heroes grown up. And I think I earlier mentioned they were probably between 23 to 24 years old, which would mean that, for example, Darby and Shigaraki are probably around 28, 29, almost in their 30s, and I think Kai Chisaki's around that age too, because he was very young when he was a leader in his 20s. So now 7 years has passed. He's probably in his 30s. I think they're all in their 30s. But yes, that's true for the first part. The second part is what got me so excited. Are their travelers the ones you mentioned that have had several lifetimes and are revived by this doctor in the Halloween video? I will have to say this because I think a lot of people have actually started following up after this, and I did see a comment earlier on Kai Chisaki's video, An Arm for an Arm, here, and link in the description, like here on screen I mean. But yes, this is correct. The travelers who are with the villains have lived once before. They've died once and have been revived. So not several lifetimes, not many. But they have lived at least once and have died to then be revived by this doctor. Which, it is semi-true. The nurse, the counselor, the doctor that's in the traveler logs for the Halloween specials is involved in the Pro Hero AU to some extent. They have, and just to answer your question, yes, they have been revived by this specific doctor. By this specific doctor who is actually very doting on them, kind of like family. If you ever listen to the Halloween Traveler logs and listen to exactly what she says, you'll see where she comes from. I guess you'll see what her opinions, her perspective on a lot of things are, which I guess in a way the doctor hasn't been featured quite often in the videos as of late, but they are very similar. So keep that in mind. I won't say any more. Question 3. So are the Halloween videos related to both timelines, or one of them? One thing I remember without having to look back is that the boys wanted to ask this doctor or counselor about Traveler. Is that related to the hero timeline before they're out of school, or something else? Okay, so earlier I did mention the Halloween Traveler logs are, I guess they're very closely related to the Halloween villain AU videos that came out. So they are, so the Traveler log is in direct connection with the villain AU. With the Pro Hero timeline, however, the best I could say is that if you listen to, I guess, Intermission, which is again CQ's video, there's explanation in there, or at least there's words in passing that say that they're variants. There are mains, there are variants. It all comes down to what 14 has to say. 14 says a lot of things. Some terms that she drops are, for example, travelers being in the main, and some travelers being variants. Variants, so they're just not a, I guess they're not a second, a minute, an hour, or even a year. So I'd say the best way I could reflect on that, or I could answer that question about the Halloween videos, is that the Pro Hero, I guess we're talking about the Doctor in this sense. The Doctor in the Pro Hero AU is like a reflection or a ripple, like a ripple in like a ripple of this person. And I do not want to use the word clone. A lot of people had said clone because I guess it's the best way of describing what this is, but it really isn't. They're not clones. They weren't actually cloned in that sense. I guess in a way, they're a ripple in time. They're an echo. They're a reflection of what the true essence of that person is. And I think that's the only thing I can say, or else if I explain any more, it either will convolute it or it will just shed too much light. So I'm sorry, but I guess that's the best way I can describe it. So your art question, which I think actually at this point we are getting to what you wanted to ask about stitched art, is that you do, yes, you notice that I use a Gaussian blur on my line art. So what I do is I usually try to clean up my sketched lines as best as possible. When I'm satisfied with it, I then make a copy, blur that copy with a Gaussian blur of 3.0 pixels, and then I switch that layer to color burn and put a 75% opacity on that. That does give it its glow. So it kind of gives it its glow, but it also kind of like, I guess, defines the line art better. It makes the line art a little darker and deeper. I don't know. This kind of procedure might change in future, but so far it's working for me. So I just kind of stuck with that. But your question in regards, to that process is that, does it get in the way with making fixes after the fact, since it's technically two of the same layer on top of one another? Like I've seen you fix eyes after applying the effect, so are you just fixing it twice or just reapplying the effect? Okay, so when I make fixes for my line art, there are times, yes, it's true, because when I do, like, for example, erase part of my line or recreate more lines, it'll look different. And I guess when I do fix lines, it depends on where I'm fixing the line. For example, if it's like clothes or skin, I would just normally like in a way I would normally erase what's not needed, so that maybe both the layers, redo the line on a separate layer and then replicate the same process with the Gaussian blur. So sometimes I do come up with a lot of like layers of lines depending on how much I guess I'm not satisfied with it. But when it comes to eyes, for example, because like eyes and hair are the most they're my favorite part when it comes to art. I really like playing with art and hair, and I wish I could do better. But when I do eyes, for example, because of the way the Gaussian blur actually kind of muddies the line out of the eye, I usually erase what the Gaussian blur has done so it looks crisper. Otherwise, if I draw over the line, it's like, here's an extra layer over the line art, and I start coloring over the lines from there on. So I've done that kind of stuff. I've kind of experimented in a way on how I'd like to, I guess, shade and color and light things. But every time I have to reapply the same Gaussian blur effect, it's usually on little minor things. Clothes, skin, some, yeah, usually clothes and skin, really, when I think about it. But otherwise, it's really just that. Sometimes I'm just lucky enough that if like a line's out of place for clothes, I just erase like the baseline and the Gaussian blur. You really can't see much. Sometimes the Gaussian blur in itself, the layer with the Gaussian blur that is, kind of adds a little more depth to it. So I usually leave it alone. Comes down to, I guess, what I visually see on screen. But I hope that answers your question. I'm not an expert in art. I just kind of go with the flow and do what I feel is right according to what I want to see on screen. But thank you so much. I appreciate that. It makes me wonder how I actually work with my artwork. Now here's one's interesting. Just a random Alec asked. So, a while ago I watched that one vid where Hitoshi's listener had to interrogate Seek. I remember it kinda hazily, but I do remember quite well that what Seek did during Hitoshi's and Traveler's interrogation was very different to what he did to Izuku and Traveler and Katsuki and Traveler in the babysitting duties R vids. Ever since I realized that, I've been occasionally wondering what the actual hell is Seek's quirk. Excuse me. Does he only have one quirk that messes with reality itself, or does he have multiple quirks that collectively allow him to manipulate time, space, and circumstance and all that jazz to a certain extent? I've been wondering about Hunter's Traveler too. Shouldn't they count as a villain Traveler as well? Okay, so there's two questions here. One about Seek, and one about the, I guess, villain/vigilante Traveler of Sero's. So let's start with you know what? Let's start with Sero's Traveler. We'll head on to Seek soon. They are a villain Traveler. This is true. In a way, they're more vigilante now than they are villain because they really don't do anything bad. They're a thief. All they do is just steal. They don't really harm anybody or hurt anybody, or they don't have malcontempt or ill intent towards anyone. They kind of steal because that's their way of living. That's how they've lived. But I guess if we're gonna really need to categorize them, Sero's Traveler is a villain, and if you've watched, I think the last video, not the last video, but the most important video is called Spoilers. Up on screen, as you can see, and link in the description below. Spoilers does explain a little more about where Traveler comes from. It's the video where Traveler actually opens up to Zero after, I guess, in his timeline previously, Zero's Traveler just constantly teases him and just kind of it gets him on his toes quite often, you know, all of that. But Spoilers is one of the more calmer ones where they open up to Zero about what their purpose is and what they're looking for. And in that video, they do describe that they have been actually in contact with the villains at some point in their life, but was unfortunately abandoned because they were a failure, to them at least. So that answers that question. I do hope it is appreciative. And just looking back at the title spoilers, it just makes me remember the fact that the reason why this Traveler actually exists, or at least the personality does, is because I was once a Doctor Who fan. And I kind of still am. I just don't really watch it as often. I think it's just a part of me now, and I really appreciate some of the, I guess, character development around there. But, what's her name? Oh dear. River Song. Zero's Traveler kind of acts like River Song in a way. But I do appreciate that someone in the comments, I think they've actually mentioned and said that the relationship between Zero and the Traveler there is very much like Spider-Man and Black Cat, and I was so ecstatic when I read that comment. I was like, yes, someone's found out. Yay! So I'm just happy that a lot of people are kind of discovering these little tiny things in the story, and it makes me happy. So on to your other question, Alec. Seek's quirk. What the heck is Seek's quirk? So ideally in Pro Hero AU, Seek's quirk is primarily, as we all know, reverts you into a child. Basically, yeah, in a way, you say messes with reality in a way. That's true. He reverts yourself into a child. So again, if we bring up the intermission video, he does question that briefly about why he was given that kind of quirk. Of which 14 says, "Oh, you mean your quirk? Well, I've bestowed on you much more powerful gifts before, but I just find this one absolutely delightful." So that's paraphrasing. I don't know exactly what she says, but it's along the lines of those. 14 is responsible for Seek's, I guess, powers wherever he goes and wherever he travels. So he questions why this one particularly, of which 14 kind of responds in jest. But to answer your question a little further about him having multiple quirks, about how he can manipulate time, space, and circumstance, that's, I guess, dependent on where he is based in this large pool of universes and worlds. And I guess I'm only guessing this, but I feel like you're just kind of trying to understand between, well, first about the video Between You and Me, and then there's the video Trouble in Paradise, because he displays two different kinds of powers. In Between You and Me, he does explain that he needs an object of reference, or at least the Traveler assumes he needs an object of reference in order to navigate the world with whatever quirk he had. Now, the thing with Seek is that during the time when he's in imprisonment, he didn't have a quirk. I guess in a way he didn't have anything. So he was just sitting there waiting for something to happen, or else he'd just be, unfortunately, quirkless. But in Trouble in Paradise, he did have powers, and that is because he was still, I guess, attached to the other world that he just originally came from. Which, of course, was, a lot of people have guessed it in the comments, and I'll just say it here anyway. It's the fantasy AU. So he had powers based on that, considering he still had two objects of references in the world that he could still attach himself to. Kirishima, which people have guessed is the Dragon Knight, and Bakugo, which people have guessed was the dragon. And I understand a lot of people got confused about that, but that's true. So he had two objects of reference in that regard to have those powers accessible, but once they disappeared, he no longer had them. He was basically powerless. This is the reason why in Trouble in Paradise he decides to surrender, because he can't do anything more. So a lot of Seek and how he acts and reacts to things is dependent on what he's able to attain and what he's able to do. Still, that's Seek for you. He seems almighty and powerful, but trust me, he's actually under the whims of a lot of things that he has no control over. And lastly, before the end of this video, Cry Forever had asked, actually quite recently, so I just slipped this one in, are you going to make more videos about when they still were at UA? I really do, especially for a few. And I think in the last Q&A I mentioned about how old they are and how they came to be and have met. So the only ones, according to this universe, that have been in AU would be Todoroki, Shinso, and Bakugo. Everyone else, so that is Midoriya, Kaminari, Sero, and Kirishima, met everyone outside of Academy. But who knows? Maybe there'll be a time when I do think I would see them in this kind of scenario and we'd go from there. Who knows? It may be part of the villain AU where you see them in the Academy. Anyhow, we've reached the end of the Q&A. I hope you enjoyed watching Shota Todoroki come to life. I wasn't really that, I guess, proud of the fact because of the way he was posed, but it was a challenge for me, and I hope that I will continue to do more. So, until next time, keep asking questions. I'm happy to answer them as best as I can. See you soon.